Okay, they are coming.
Okay,
You can
okay.
test one or two more. Yes.
Is it coming, sir?
Yes, they're coming.
Okay, okay.
And I think in full screen it will come better. Anyway, it is coming.
No, I have kept in full screen.
Okay, okay. That's all right.
Okay.
It's fine. So now you can stop sharing.
Okay, fine.
Just we'll wait a couple of minutes, then we'll start.
Yes, sure, sure.
Will you? এটা খালি মোর আছে করতে একদম কাছে দরকার নেই
আমরা সমস্ত লিখতে পারছি।
Anyway. Very good afternoon to all of you for joining this 79th distinguished lecture today. So after actually our INA Technology Conclave 2026 held between the 11th and 12th July of this year, we couldn't have actually many distinguished lectures, and today is the first such lecture being organized. Now we expect by the end of this year to have about 100 lectures, that is 21 lectures more. I'm happy to say so that in September we have already organized 6 distinguished lectures, and all related to, electrical power systems, and that will be a sort of a week-long actually celebration, daily one lecture. So now today for this lecture, our distinguished speaker is none other than Professor Prabir Kumar Biswas. He received his BTech, MTech and PhD degrees in Electronics and Electrical Communication Engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur in 1985, 1989 and 1991 respectively. He served Bharat Electronics Limited, BEL, Ghaziabad as Deputy Engineer during the period 85 to 87. In 91, he joined the Faculty of Department of Electronics and Electrical Communication Engineering at IIT Kharagpur, where he is presently a professor, and he was holding the position of the head of the department during 2015 to 2020. He served as the head of the Computer and Informatics Centers at IIT Kharagpur from March 2008 to December 2014. He also held the position position of the head of the Department of Artificial Intelligence and also the project director of AI for IPCS Innovation Hub at IIT Kharagpur. Professor Biswas visited the University of Kaiserslautern, Germany during March 2002 to 2003, and as Alexander von Humboldt Fellow. Professor Biswas is a senior member of IEEE and was the chairman of IEEE Kharagpur section during 2004. He is the life member of the former president of Indian Unit of Pattern Recognition and Artificial Intelligence, India. He is also the former additional director of West Bengal Electronics Industry Development Corporation. His research interests are in image and video processing, pattern recognition, machine learning, multimedia systems, etc. He published more than 200 research papers in various international and national journals and conference proceedings in these areas. He has prepared 5 online video courses under NPTEL program. He has worked as the member of the technical program committees of several national and international conferences and served as the organizing chair of Indian Conference of Computer Vision, Graphics and Image Processing in 2008. With this, now today, Professor Biswas is going to talk on actually generative adversarial network, GAN, an efficient tool for data generation and data completion. Already, its abstract has been really circulated. You might have seen it already. So there is no need actually to repeat it here. With these actually few words, I will now invite Professor Prabir Kumar Biswas to please deliver his talk. After his talk, there will be question and answers, and then of course there will be a formal vote of thanks. Professor Biswas, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this lecture in front of all distinguished researchers and scientists. Though this lecture I'm planning to give on generative adversarial network and its use in data generation and data completion, but assuming a mixed audience, I felt that I should start with some basics so that persons who are not acquainted with artificial intelligence or machine learning should not feel the topic to be difficult. So I'll start with basic concepts, then gradually I'll move towards the generative learning models. So I'll share my slides and I'll start my talk. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, perfectly. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So this is the title of the talk, Generative Adversarial Network, an efficient tool for data generation and data completion. Now, before I move into this advanced topic, I start with these two images with a question that can we recognize these two pictures? The answer I expect is obviously yes. The picture on the left is cave painting in Ajanta caves, and the picture on the right is the old Parliament building in New Delhi. But whether we recognize this or not, that is not all that important. The question is, how do we recognize them? Do we remember the color or the intensity or texture at every point in the image? If it is so, then how is it possible that we will be able to recognize, let me have the pointer here. This image, which is distorted both in terms of the aspect ratio, that there is geometrical distortion. There is also color distortion. This one, there is a lot of color distortion. This is the one that I have shown before. So obviously, if we remember the color, texture, intensity at every point, we won't be able to associate these images with the image that we had shown before, that is this one, as Ajanta cave paintings. So that clearly indicates that it is not that we remember point by point, but we make a description of what we see, and a description of that, or a this model of that, is embedded in our brain. So next time, when we see such a kind of image or such a kind of picture, we try to generate similar such description, and then we try to match in the description domain. So if the description of the new image that we generate is similar to the description of an object that we have seen before, then we try to associate this new object with the description of the object that we already knew. And because of that, even if an image of this form is shown, here you find the texture is missing, only thing is we have color shades, or a hand sketch like this, where there is no color, no texture, but we simply have some sketch information or boundary information. But even with this, we can still recognize that these are different forms of the same image or the same Ajanta cave painting. So it is not the description of the entire area that we remember, but what we have in our brain is a sort of model or some sort of features or descriptors of what we have already seen. So that brings us to a machine learning model, something like this. You give an input signal that may be a visual signal like this, or it may be an acoustic signal like voice. We try to generate some descriptors of this, the descriptors which we typically describe as feature vectors, and these feature vectors are fed to the classifier, both for training the classifier as well as understanding or recognizing what feature vector or what signal we have. So there are classically different types of classifiers like Bayesian classifiers, support vector machine neural networks, and all that. So now let us see that what kind of descriptors we have. So as we have shown before, that these descriptors can be intensity descriptor, it may be color descriptor, it may be boundary descriptor, it may be texture descriptor, and so on. Now coming to this particular case, where the boundary information of this animal, they are mostly similar. It appears to be horse, but if you look closely between these two, this is the boundary of a horse, but this is the boundary of a zebra. So if we want to distinguish between a class of animals containing the horse and the zebra from other types of animals, then this boundary description may be sufficient. But if we want to distinguish between a horse and zebra, then boundary description or boundary-based feature is not sufficient. Then we have to go for what is called region feature, that is the property of the area bounded within this boundary. And that property may be intensity distribution, something like this. It may be color distribution, it may be texture distribution. So let us just briefly see that what kind of boundary descriptor we can have. So a boundary can be approximated by a polygon, something like this. So there are a number of algorithms using which a closed boundary can be converted to a polygon. So once we have such a polygonal approximation, then we know that in a polygon there are a number of vertices, and every vertex we have some internal angle. And if we put these angles either in the clockwise fashion or in the anti-clockwise fashion, what I get is a sequence of angle values. Then we can use something called an autoregressive model, and we can extract the autoregression coefficients, and these autoregression coefficients are different for different types of polygons. So they can be used as features or feature descriptors or feature vectors. But once we go for this polygonization, then you find that given a shape something like this, the polygonal approximation was approximation of carved boundaries by straight line segments. So the detailed information of these carved boundaries were lost. So we can also extract this detailed information of the carved boundaries by what are known as statistical moments. So what I can do is every segment of the carved boundary, which is something like this, can be normalized. And if the length along the segment, the linear segment, we call it by, we represent it by a variable r. And if this curve is normalized, then this curve represents the probability distribution of r. And once we have that, we can compute different statistical moments. These statistical moments are available in textbooks, so I'm not going to explain this. And these statistical moments, they differentiate between different types of curves. So these are another kind of parameters or descriptor shape-based parameters that we can extract. Similarly, going for this intensity or color distribution, we know that given an intensity profile, we can have its intensity histogram. This intensity histogram, if we would normalize this, it becomes intensity probability density. And once it is intensity probability density, again, we can compute different types of statistical moments. Similarly, for color, we know that color image has got 3 different planes, red plane, green plane, and blue plane. For each of these red, green, or blue components, I can have the corresponding histograms, and we can have the statistical moments of these histograms as well. For the textures, there are various popular mathematical techniques using which we can get texture descriptors. One of them is you can get descriptors from a type of matrix which are called co-occurrence matrix. Similarly, we can also have the descriptors in the transform domain. Wavelet transformation is one of the transformation where every signal is divided into different subbands, and we can compute energies of different subbands, put them in the form of a particular vector, and these vectors will be different for different textures. Other technique which is very, very popular for texture description or texture discrimination is what is known as Gabor filter. So I have different mathematical techniques. Using these mathematical techniques, we can compute different properties of the given signal, and if those quantities are put in a particular order, then what I get is a descriptor vector or a feature vector. Once I have these feature vectors, this is just an example, then the feature vectors belonging to different objects, they form clusters in your feature space. So just an example case, if I have a bird and suppose my descriptor is a 2-dimensional descriptor or 2-dimensional feature vector, then the feature vector corresponding to one bird will appear somewhere over here. Feature vector to a second bird will appear nearby to the previous one because it is hardly that 2 or more birds are identical. There is some interclass variation. Similarly, another bird comes over here. If I have a car, the corresponding feature vector for car will appear somewhere in the feature space, but it will be away from the feature vectors of the birds. Similarly, second car, if we have dog, things like this. So if I take the feature vectors for different objects or different animals, you find that the feature vectors form clusters into the feature space. So this is a distribution which is called class conditional distribution. And once we have this class conditional distribution, then my classification becomes very, very simple, that what I need to do is I need to find out the boundaries among these different clusters. So next, once I get the feature vector corresponding to any unknown object, if that feature vector falls in region A, I'll classify that to be a bird. If it is in B, I'll classify that to be a car, and so on. So that is how the traditional machine learning works. Now, these are the feature vectors that we have computed, that we have discussed so far. They are known as handcrafted features. Now, these handcrafted features have certain problem. Let us see that how do we recognize this particular monument. All of us know that this is Taj Mahal. So if we are sure that this is the image of a Taj Mahal, then we are wrong. This is not Taj Mahal. I come to the next slide. The image on the left is the image of Taj Mahal, whereas image on the right is what is known as Bibi Ka Maqbara at Aurangabad. But structurally, color-wise, texture-wise, so similar that whatever feature that I could think of, those will become very, very similar for Taj Mahal as well as for Bibi Ka Maqbara. So these descriptors, which we have decided that we'll use these descriptors for distinction between these two different monuments, maybe our approach will not be correct or the classification will not be correct. So instead of using the handcrafted feature, can we have machine crafted feature or ask the machine itself to decide what kind of descriptor it will use for classification or recognition purpose? So we'll have two expectations that whatever descriptor we want to extract or we want the machine to extract, that should be sensitive enough to the input data that we give so that I can also reconstruct the same data from the descriptors. And at the same time, it should not be so sensitive or it should be insensitive enough that it does not just memorize that given a signal, what will be the feature vector, or given a feature vector, what will be the corresponding signal. Or in other words, in terms of machine learning, this is what is called overfitting problem. So there should not be any overfitting. Fortunately, a neural network model exists for this, which is called an autoencoder. The purpose of autoencoder is at the input, you feed the output, input signal. At the output of the autoencoder, I want the same signal back. And while passing from the input to the output, the signal passes through a bottleneck layer or hidden layer in which the number of elements is much, much less than the number of elements at the input or number of elements at the output. So you find that this performs two different kinds of tasks. This part or input portion of this autoencoder encodes the input signal to a much, much lesser dimensional space. And the output part decodes this input signal, this signal at the middle layer that we get, which is a descriptor, so that using this descriptor, the decoder can decode the signal. So effectively, in the middle layer or bottleneck layer, what we get is a some sort of descriptor at a much lower dimensional space, which we can use as a feature vector for recognition purpose. So effectively, this is the same autoencoder, which is divided into two parts over here. This is the input part of the encoder part, which gives you a feature vector or descriptor of the input signal. And the output part, it takes the feature descriptor, the feature vector, and regenerates the signal. So this is the encoder part, and this is the decoder part. Now over here for recognition purpose, only the encoder part is required. So once this network is properly trained, we forget about the decoder part, we only use the encoder part. And effectively, earlier this feature vector extraction component that we had, which we said that we do using different kinds of feature extraction techniques, this job is given to the encoder part of the autoencoder. The remaining part remains the same. So this is a model that we have discussed so far. This is what is known as discriminative model. Because this particular machine learning model, it discriminates one class of object from another class of object. And the training of this discriminator model is performed in a way which is called back propagation learning. So what is that? If for different kind of input classes, we have different types of distribution. So I take a signal or a feature from a particular distribution which belongs to a particular class, then feed it to my machine learning model to interpret or to predict what that class is. So at the output, I can have various kinds of combinations. If the input is cat and the model also predicts that it is a cat, then there is no error. But if the input is cat, but the model predicts that it's a dog, or the input is dog, but the model predicts that it's a cat, then there is an error. So whenever we have such error, then this backpropagation algorithm, using this backpropagation algorithm, you try to tune the parameters of this machine learning model theta so that the output error is minimized. Ideally, we want that the output error should be equal to 0. And once this model is trained properly, then given any input signal X, the model should be able to identify to which class that input X belongs. And this is what is discriminative model. Now, what we are talking about the generative model. So Richard Feynman, we all know the great physicist, he told that what I cannot create, I do not understand. That means if I really recognize something or if I really understand something, I should be able to recreate it. So what is the model or how do you train that model for creation of such a kind of signal? You have to collect a large amount of data in the domain in which I want to train the model and train your model to generate using that huge volume of data. We have to train the model so that it can generate similar such data in future. So what is this generative model? Let us talk about this. So what we said is that the feature vectors, the different components of feature vectors capture different properties of the input signal. So suppose I have features something like this, that for an animal, one feature says that the animal is big. Another feature says that it has 4 legs. Another feature says it has big ears, it has long trunk, a pair of tusks, and so on. A generative model should be able to say what this animal is. And I hope all of you have been able to predict that this animal is nothing but an elephant. So that is what is expected out of a generative model. And all these different features, they are called features or latent variables, all of them taken together called feature vectors or latent vectors. So what is expected out of a generative model is that given a latent vector, the generative model should be able to generate the signal of which the latent vector has been fed to the generative model. So we just talk about autoencoder. We said that the input part of the autoencoder is the encoder, which gives you latent vector or the feature vector of the signal that you have. And then decoder part of the autoencoder takes the latent vector and regenerates the signal. So this is what we have. Autoencoder, the decoder takes the latent vector and the decoder regenerates the signal. Then simply can be said that once an autoencoder is trained, then the decoder portion of the autoencoder can be used as a generative model. But there is a problem. The problem is the autoencoder always tries to give us a compact representation of the input signal in the latent space. And while doing so, it just traces to the subspace in the latent space in which it has seen what is the input signal. And for a generative model, so as a result, the latent space that we have is not a continuous space, but it's a sparse space. In case of a generative model, what we expect is that we will just sample a latent vector from the input space, and that latent vector will be given to the generative model, and the generative model should be able to give me the output. But the problem with this decoder of the autoencoder is that because my latent space is not a continuous space, so I can sample a signal which the autoencoder never seen. And if such a latent vector, the sampled latent vector, is fed to the decoder may not be able to give you an output which is the proper output. So this is just an example I have shown that what is the nature of the feature vectors that we get out of autoencoder. you find that this feature space is very, very sparse. So obviously, if I sample a point over here, which the autoencoder has never seen, and feed this to the generator will not be able to generate that particular signal. There is an example from a database, which is called MNIST database, which is a database of handwritten numerals from 0 to 9. So what we want is that my latent space, instead of being sparse, it should be a continuous space. Or in other words, there should be a distribution, or the latent space should represent a distribution. So for example, if smile is one of the attributes or one of the features, then in the latent space, I should have a distribution of smile. That means there should be a mean value and a variance around that mean value, so that I can sample smoothly from that particular latent space. So just an example over here, there are 3 different images. The first image, what will be the value of the smile attribute over here? Because it appears that this boy is not at all happy. He is not smiling at all. So the latent value in the discrete space, was what the autoencoder will generate, is something like a negative value for this smile. This image, all of you know, Mona Lisa, absolutely neutral face. So the smile value will be around 0. This boy is smiling a lot, so the smile value will be positive. So these are the discrete values which are likely to be generated by an autoencoder. And given these discrete values, if I sample a value somewhere over here, I cannot generate such attribute. But instead of having discrete value, if the smile is represented in the form of a probability distribution, something like this, you find that the space becomes continuous, and I can sample any value from over here and feed it to the generator model, so that the generator model will be able to generate this particular expression. So that is how it looks like. So then I'll just skip these slides. So there is a variation of autoencoder, which is known as variational autoencoder. So variational autoencoder captures this sort of distribution from the given data or the training data. So this is the structure of a typical variational autoencoder. You find that in case of earlier autoencoder, at the input node, we had said that we had few nodes, which gives you the feature vector. Now, in this particular variational autoencoder, at this hidden layer, it is not the feature vectors, but it gives you the mean and standard deviation of different feature components. That means what this autoencoder is trying to capture is what is the distribution of the feature vectors, and it gives you a continuous distribution. And once this autoencoder or variational autoencoder is trained properly, then I can forget about this encoder part. I just have this distribution. You sample a vector from this distribution, give it to the decoder, and the decoder will give you the output. So this is how an autoencoder works, and this is one of the generative models. There are other generative models as well, like generative adversarial network. I'll also skip this. I just said that what autoencoder does. So the other kind of generative model is what is generative adversarial network. So what is this generative adversarial network? It simply defines a probability distribution using the given input data. The way this generative adversarial network works is something like this. I have 2 different networks. One of the network is called a generator network, and the other network is the discriminator network. It is similar to or same as the discriminative model that we have said earlier. So the generator network, it gets an input feature vector and generates an output, like output image, which we are calling as a fake image. So this is not a real one, but it's a generated one or artificial one. The discriminator network tries to discriminate between these 2. So there are 2 steps of training of such generative adversarial network. In one stage, we have to train the discriminator, so that the discriminator learns how to discriminate between the real images and synthetic images. And during training of the generator network, usually because the generator network is outputting a synthetic image, the discriminator will give that it is not a real image, but it's a synthetic image. So that is an error message which goes to the generator, and using this error message, the parameters of the generator are to be modified or tuned so that the generator becomes stronger and it can generate an image which is a real looking image. So these are the two different steps in which a generative adversarial network is to be trained. So these are the loss functions which are to be maximized for training the discriminator. And similarly, we also have the loss function for training the generator. So once the generator model or generator discriminator network taken as a pair is trained properly, after that we can forget about the discriminator because our job is to generate the real looking image. So these are few examples. You find that these are the images which are actually generated by such generative adversarial network. It was reported in ICLR 2018. And you can really find that these images are so photorealistic. So that is what a generative model can do. Similarly, the other things can be done that given a sketch, something like this is what is called semantic. This is the segmented part, semantic segmented part. Given such a kind of semantic segmented scene, the generative network can produce and output something like this. Given a black and white image, it can generate color images. Given sketch, it can generate a photorealistic image of the sketch and so on. So these are the powers of generative network that you can have. Similarly, this is another example of SRGAN, that is Super Resolution Generative Adversarial Network. This work was reported in CVPR 2016. So given a low resolution image, from a low resolution image, you can generate high resolution image using generative adversarial network. So this is one which is called Super Resolution Generative Adversarial Network, or SRGAN. Similarly, these are many other examples. So we have used this generative adversarial network for semantic inpainting of images. We have other examples as well. We'll come to those one after another. So first, let us see that what is this semantic inpainting. So suppose I have an image, something like this. You can see it is my own photograph. Standing in front of a very old temple. I think this was in Warangal. The temple is a historical temple, but you also notice that there is a water pipeline over here. And suppose I don't want this water pipeline to be present in this image, so I want to remove it. So I make a big hole over here. But obviously, this is an image which I don't like. I want this image to be realistic. So I want this hole that I have created to be filled naturally. That means whatever is in the surroundings, that should be filled up within this hole that I have created. So this is just one example that if I have an undesired object in a nice photograph, I would like to remove that undesired object, and the hole that is created, that should be filled so that the image looks natural. Similarly, other examples can be, you all might have experienced this, that in your old album, if you have old photographs, you might have seen that different parts of the photographs are damaged due to moisture, due to bacterial effect, and whatnot. So we would like to repair or correct all those damaged images. So this is a problem which is called semantic inpainting, and it refers to filling up of large holes in an image. We can also consider this to be an error concealment framework, that is restore the lost regions of an image. And as I said, that it can also be used for removing unwanted objects from an image. So it is something like this, that I have this damaged image where few portions are not available or damaged. This is the mask representing what this damaged region. Then I have a generative inpainter network, which will inpaint or repair this damaged image so that I get a real looking image. So there are two ways of doing it. The traditional school of thought is something like this, which uses explicit reconstruction law. So for this, what I need is that for training of this network, I need the damaged image and the corresponding undamaged image, so that I can define an error function in the reconstruction part, reconstructed image portion in the damaged part, and then my network can be trained so that that error is minimized or that error is removed. The other school of thought is the generative approach, where we don't use the explicit reconstruction laws in the damaged region. Rather, what we want is let the generative model generate a new realistic image, but I put a constraint. The constraint is that in my damaged image, whatever information I have in the undamaged region, like over here. So this is my damaged region where I don't have any information, but these are the regions which are undamaged. So I want to create an image like this, where this undamaged portion should be intact. But this, I'm not trying to fill this locally, but it's a global approach. I generate a new image, and in the new image, this undamaged portion will be intact. And because this is a realistic image, so it is quite obvious that this damaged portion will also look natural. So that is the generative school of thought. So here, how it can be done? Once your generative model is trained with large number of examples from this particular domain, then you feed an input vector, latent vector, to the generative model. The generative model will give you an output. Then you compute the error in the undamaged portion of the output of your input image and the corresponding portion in the generated image. And your aim should be that you iterate in the latent vector domain until and unless you get a latent vector for which the error between the undamaged part of the damaged image and the corresponding part of the generated image, they become zero. And that is where, when I get a realistic image, where the damaged portion will be filled. So here I have two indirect losses for optimization of the latent vector Z. One of the loss function is what is called perceptual loss. This perceptual loss comes from the discriminator, which actually tells me whether the image that has been created, whether that image is a realistic image. So if it is not realistic, the perceptual loss will be high. If it is realistic, then the perceptual loss will be low. And the other part is the contextual loss. This contextual loss tells you what is the error between the undamaged part of the damaged image and the corresponding part of the reconstructed image. So the total loss that has to be minimized is a combination of these two. So using this, so this is my total loss, contextual loss plus perceptual loss. And my latent vector, the target latent vector, will be the latent vector for which this loss function is minimal. So this is the same concept which is shown graphically. This is a visual which shows that how from the damaged part, gradually you go for filling this, the damaged regions. So this is by iterating in the latent space or in the feature domain. Now, this is our contribution in this work, that can we have a smarter initial solutions. So because this is an iterative approach, where the iteration is done in the latent vector space, so the number of iterations or the time required to repair or to restore the image may be quite large. So we thought that why every time you should start from a feature vector which is selected at random. Rather, we will go for a pool of feature vectors. So this is my pool of feature vectors. For every pool, I have the corresponding generated image. Now, given a damaged image, what I'll do is, out from this pool, I'll select that particular image or the corresponding feature vector as my initial feature vector, which is nearest to my damaged image. And how I compare nearest? By comparing the intensity, color, and the structure of the undamaged part of the damaged image. So that is done using this nearest neighbor search. And I start from that particular feature vector, and it is quite expected because now your initial feature vector or latent vector is very near to the target. The number of iterations that will be required for restoration operation will also be quite less. So for this nearness or the loss function, we have used one is data loss, that is simply intensity or color difference between the undamaged part and the corresponding part of my pooled image. And the other one is structural loss or the gradient difference loss, which is the loss defined over the gradient in the image space. So these are two different loss components. Using these loss components, you find out that which is the nearest one. And starting from there, you iterate, and it is expected that the number of iterations that will be required will be quite less. So these are some advantages of this technique that we have shown visually. This is the final result that we have got. This was the base paper, where on an average, the number of iterations was 800 iterations. Execution time was 9 seconds for this particular model when executed on this model. And with our approach, the number of iterations were on an average reduced to 30, and the execution time was reduced to 1.9. So this is for inpainting of static images or still images. Then we extended this concept to video inpainting, because in case of old videos also, you can have similar kind of problem. Now, in case of video, we have one advantage, that is the frames which are temporally very near, they are likely to be similar frames. So that there we have exploited what is called temporal redundancy. So by using this, for say t minus first frame, I start with an initial estimate, say z t minus 1 init, which is the initial estimate of the latent vector. Then by iteration, I come to a final latent vector, which is z t minus 1 final. And because the t minus first frame and the tth frame, they should be very similar. So I can use this t minus 1 final latent vector, which was the latent vector corresponding to the tth frame of the reconstructed restored tth frame. This I can use as the initial estimate of the latent vector for the tth frame. So you find that this is very, very close because the tth frame and the t minus first frame should be very similar. So it is very, very close to the final latent vector, which is zt final, right? And so on. So whatever is the final latent vector of the previous frame, that can be taken as used as the initial feature vector of the current frame. Whatever is the final feature vector of the current frame, that can be used as the initial feature vector of the next frame, and so on. By using this, the execution time will be very, very small. So this is one. The second one, the other loss that we have used is what is called group consistency loss. Now, what is group consistency loss? It is quite natural that the frames in a video sequence should be temporally consistent. That is, my first frame and the content of the third frame should not be widely different, because in that case, the video will have jitter. So this temporal consistency loss is defined over a frame of windows, a window of frames we define as W. So you take the absolute difference between the feature vectors of every pair of frames. And that absolute difference should be minimized if the frames are consistent. So these are two kinds of losses. This is a group consistency loss that we have used for video inpainting. And that gave us a speed up of almost 80 times. Here is some visual output. So these are masked video sequence. This is what was obtained using the base paper, and this is what has been obtained using the technique that we have proposed. So this is one. Then we thought that we are iterating for restoration purpose over the feature space. Can we avoid this iteration? The motivation of this work is that in the damaged image, we do have a large portion which is undamaged. And that should be enough to tell you or to give you an hint that what should be the corresponding latent vector. So our idea is that using the damaged image, you predict what is the latent vector, and using that latent vector, using the GAN model, you generate the restored image. So this gives our publication in CVPR 2020. So this is what we have. Suppose we have a trained generative adversarial network. Now we want to train another network. This is already trained, so we have shown it as locked. We are not changing the parameters of this. This is another model, which is the predictor model, which we want to train so that given a damaged image, this predictor model will predict the latent vector. The latent vector will go to the generator model. The generator model will give me the restored image. This is what is our aim. So how do you train this predictor model? So again, we use a number of loss functions. There is a perceptual loss as before. The perceptual loss simply tells you that how realistic or photorealistic the generated image is. And this is what is the output of the discriminator of the GAN. We also defined something called spatially adaptive contextual loss. So this is different from the contextual loss that we defined earlier, because here we are going for hole filling. So we want that if there is any trace of discontinuity at the boundary of the hole, that discontinuity will be quite visible. So in the loss function, we give higher weightage to the boundary. And that is what is the spatially adaptive contextual loss. The other one is the structural loss, which is defined in the gradient. So combination of all these gives me the total loss function, that is the perceptual loss, spatially adaptive contextual loss, and the gradient difference loss. And when we train this prediction network, we try to minimize this overall loss. So accordingly, this predictor model will also be trained. And once the predictor model is trained, you feed a damaged image to the input to the predictor model. The predictor model predicts what is the corresponding latent vector or the feature vector. That feature vector goes to your generative model, and generative model gives you the output. So, and this entire operation, once your predictor model is properly trained, it becomes a single pass inference model. I don't need iteration anymore, because the purpose of iteration was to come to or try to select the appropriate latent vector where that latent vector is being predicted by the predictor model. So this entire model becomes a single pass inference. Now, the other problem that we faced is that when we go for such image reconstruction, the output of the generative adversarial network can be multimodal, in the sense that suppose this is your undistorted image or damaged image. This is the damaged image. A portion over here is actually damaged. Now, when this damaged image we try to restore using the generative adversarial network, there are various possibilities. All these are possible output, and the generative adversarial network can output any of them. Now, this is fine so far as restoration of a static image is concerned. But you think of a video sequence. Because the output of the generative adversarial network is multimodal, it may quite happen that in a short sequence of video, in different frames, the actor's face is smiling. But because of this multimodal output, I can have a kind of situation that one frame, the face will be smiling. The next frame, the face will be angry. Next frame, the face will be neutral. Next frame, again, it will be smiling. So you find that there will be frequent alteration of facial expression, which is not at all expected. So we want a sort of probability, that is, which particular output is most probable, which is less probable, so that using this sort of ranking, we can select the most probable output which matches with the previously reconstructed frame. So once the first frame is reconstructed, the facial expression of the second frame should be similar to the first frame. And that is a sort of ranking we can do. And from here, the most probable one can be selected so that that type of problem does not occur. So how to do it? It can be done by using something which is called structural prior. Our facial expression is, in many cases, is captured in the pattern of some certain landmark points in our face. So those landmark points can be eyebrow lines, can be the tips of the noise or the boundaries of the noise, lips, and all that. So in this paper in ICCB 2017, the authors suggested 68 such landmark points on face, which captures your facial expression. So we thought it this way, that given a face image, you also you extract those landmark points, and from the landmark points, you identify what is the facial expression. And when you train your network, not only use the image, but along with the image or the frame, you also use this landmark points. But there comes a problem. The problem is the position of the landmark points within the damaged region, they will not be correct. So we thought to use another kind of network, which is called denoising autoencoder. So we assume that whatever landmark points you extract within the damaged regions, those are actually noisy landmark points. And then you feed these noisy landmark points to the denoising autoencoder, so that the autoencoder can remove this noise and can give me the correct landmark points. So this is the entire sequence of that denoising autoencoder. And using this concept, you find that how these landmark points have been refined. So on the top row, we get the different landmark points, and in the bottom row, we get the refined landmark points. So now once I get this, in my training phase, what I'll have is I will use both the image, the damaged image, as well as this landmark points for training my entire chain. So once this is done, then again for the restoration purpose also, along with the damaged frame, you also give the landmark points to get your predicted output or the restored output. So because here, this landmark points captures your facial expression, so it is quite logical that the restored image that you get that will also maintain the same facial expression with which it was reconstructed the previous time. So here we have made an experiment to see that what is the effect of these landmark points on facial reconstruction. You find in the first case, your latent vector was same, but the landmark points are different. So because the latent vector is same, so it generates the same facial image, but the facial expression becomes different for different landmark images or different landmark points. Similarly, the second one, where the latent vectors were different, but the landmark points were same. So here you find that because the latent vector is different, so it will generate different images, but this landmark, the same landmark points, the same facial expression, though the face images are different. So this is another kind of work that we have done. Then we have extended this work to the completion of 3D point cloud or three-dimensional structures. So it is something like this. Suppose we have the scanned 3D points of an input object which is damaged in the sense some portions are not available. And I want this generative model to restore all these damaged regions. So this is my output that I expect. Now here, since the 3D structures are usually much more complicated than two-dimensional images, so we thought that instead of using a single latent vector for the generation purpose, let us use multiple latent vectors for generation so that different latent vectors can contribute to reconstruction of different parts of the 3D point cloud. So again, the reconstruction chain is similar. You sample the latent vector from the latent space, from the feature space, give it to the generator model. The generator model gives you the output or the restored output. Then you find out what is the loss between the restored output, between your input and the corresponding part in the restored output, along with the discriminator loss or the perceptual loss. And you minimize this loss so that finally you get an output which is a perfect reconstruction of the damaged one. So this is your purpose. And for this, the loss function that was used is what is called chamfer distance, unlike in the previous one. And there is also this discriminator loss or the perceptual loss. I'm not going into details of this, that how from the restored image, you find out what are the parts corresponding to the visible parts of the available parts in the damaged image. So this we have done using nearest neighbor concept. So because now I want multiple latent vectors, so what we have done is we have taken a trained generative model from this paper of ICCB 2019. This generative model is actually a tree-structured graph convolution network. So what we have done is we have split this generative model into two parts. The initial part is the initial generator, and the final part is the final generator. Then you separate out these two, replicate the initial generator, make different copies of this initial generator so that every generator gets a different latent vector. This output is not the final output. So here we still have feature maps. So after we get feature maps from these different generators, we combine these feature maps and this combined feature maps is given to the final generator. The final generator gives the final. So here what we have in between these two, we have what is a fusion network, and we train these fusion networks using the loss function, which minimizes the loss function. So that is our approach. So using this approach, this is our final architecture that we have used. I'm not going into the detail of mathematics. This explains mathematically how it is done. So the concept, as I said, that I have multiple feature vectors. Every feature vector is given to the corresponding initial generator. The feature maps that you get from the initial generators, they are grouped. And after grouping, you fuse those generators using fusion parameters. And these fusion parameters are trained using backpropagation learning algorithm while minimizing the final loss that you get or error that you get. Okay. These are certain outputs that you have obtained. This is the ground. These are the ground truth. These are the damaged input or the partial input. This is the output that we have used using our multi-latent GAN inversion concept. And these are the outputs using the other literature, as reported in other literature. So here you find that the output which is generated by using our multi-latent GAN inversion concept is much better than the outputs obtained by other researchers. So this is for restoration of 3D images. Then we have taken this work further. This is some ablation study that what is the contribution of different latent vectors. So this gives what is the contribution of the latent vector 1. This tells you what is the contribution of the latent vector 2, latent vector 3, and so on. And this is your final output, where the ground truth is this. We have extended this work further for digital restoration of archaeological artifacts. This is a work which was done in collaboration with Indian Museum, Kolkata. All of you have seen, whenever you have visited a museum, that you have large number of artifacts, historical artifacts, which are damaged. So here I have just shown on two of them. We have digitized around 60 such artifacts. We are still partially successful in digital restoration. Now, in this case, let me tell you that the kind of restoration that we are trying to do is digital restoration. We are not touching the original one. Original one is simply used for scanning purpose, and that scanning is non-destructive scanning using optical scanners, so that we can get the 3D point cloud. And our entire restoration work is on the 3D point cloud. And after that restoration, we are taking 3D print of those restored point clouds. For restoration, we are not touching the originals at all. In fact, we are not allowed to do that. So these are some of the damaged ones. Now, these structures are much more complicated than the 3D point clouds that we have just shown before. So here there are two contradictory requirements. One is that when you go for reconstruction, the reconstruction is local in nature. Whereas while you reconstruct any of such damaged images, the context you have to gather from the entire structure. So I have the local minute reconstruction requirement. At the same time, the requirement of gathering contextual information, which is global in nature. So this local information and the global information, they are to be properly utilized. So for this, what we have used is, what we have is a spectral module or encoding, decoding done in the spectral domain. So we have two different chains. This is what is in the spatial domain where we are working on the 3D point clouds. This is another one where we are working in the spectral domain, where we take the first Fourier transformation of the features, do the operation in the spectral domain, because in spectral domain, you know that if you have the FFT coefficients, then even modification of a single FFT coefficient, that affects globally on the overall structure. So that is how we capture the global context, and locally in the spatial domain, you do the corrections or the restorations. So here we use the concept or the basic idea is that we assume that whatever artifacts we have, those artifacts can be reconstructed using different parts of some prior shapes. So we have used the prior shapes, which was suggested by one of the prior researchers, which had 112 different shape priors. So we used those shape priors along with our spectral module for reconstruction purpose. I'm not going to details of this. So this is our entire operation. These are the outputs that we got from on the 3D data obtained from ShapeNet database as well as ScanNet database. So you find that this particular row is the output obtained using our approach. The last row is the ground truth, and this is the input, that is the partial input. These are the outputs obtained by other researchers. And you can see that the reconstruction that we have made using our spectral approach, spectral module, is much better than the outputs obtained by other techniques. The kind of output that we have got on these architectures is like this. So this was the damaged structure. This is what is the reconstructed part. Similarly, for the other one, this is the damaged structure in two different angles. These are the reconstructed ones, right? Now, again, let me say that our success so far is partial, because as we said that we have been able to scan around 60 such artifacts. There are thousands of artifacts in the museum. And for training a generative model, you need thousands of data, which we have not been able to generate till now. So our model is not perfectly trained. So in these two cases, we have got success. There are many other cases where we are not successful. There is another challenge for whenever you work on such historical objects is to satisfy the historians. The reason is, say, for example, when we have restored this broken arm, this is the restored part. It may quite happen that this ornament that has been placed over here, assume that this is a structure of, say, 1600 BC. And during that time, maybe this kind of ornament was not there at all. So this restoration will not be correct one, and that is a feedback only the historians can give, or the archaeologists can give. And it is very, very difficult to satisfy the historians and the archaeologists. If there is any mistake, they will tear it, it will be torn into pieces. And I have practically faced such a kind of situation. There was a lot of debate, but archaeologists said that what you have done is not correct. And maybe we are not correct because I don't have that knowledge. And even our model is not yet fully trained. So we accept that kind of error that may come over here. I think I have a few more minutes. Yeah. So these are other regions where these damages have been restored. Then we have used this generative adversarial network for domain adaptation purpose. So that led to one of our papers in the year 2019 in WSEV. So here the purpose is that you find that there are a lot of models for segmentation, detection, and recognition of objects in static images. And we also have a lot of data like Pascal VOC, MS COCO, and all that. But these databases are the databases on static images, and they are properly annotated. But the model that is trained using this static database for object detection and object recognition, if we try to use the same model for video object detection and video object recognition, that fails miserably because those models are not trained on video data. At the same time, we have volume of data which is annotated on static images, but hardly we have any annotated data on video sequences. So our purpose was that can we, because we have large volume of annotated data in the static domain, can we adapt that knowledge into video? There the problem is, say for example, here we have shown these are the static images which are quite sharp, they are focused, the objects are mostly in the center, and these are some examples of video sequences where the objects are not so clear, and in many cases the distinction between the background and the object of the foreground is not very clear. They are smeared. So can we have an approach that whatever knowledge that we have in static database, so if we transform those static images to look like a video frame and use the same annotation, the same the detector or the object boundary for training a model. So for doing this, what we needed is that given a static image, transform it using a generative model so that that static image looks like a video frame. That means the static image is appropriately distorted. And to ensure that the size of the objects in the video frame that you have generated, that remains the same, you do a back transformation that this generated video frame is back transformed into static frame. And if the video frame was properly generated, the size, texture was properly maintained, then after this backward transformation, it is expected that your original static image and this back transformed static image, they will be same. So that gives to a concept of what is called cycle GAN. And accordingly, we have this cycle and the cycle loss. So these are different loss functions using which this cycle GAN was trained. So it was something like this. In the forward chain, this is a static image. In the forward chain, what I get is a shot of, this is the one. In the forward chain, I get an image which is a distorted version of this, and this represents a corresponding frame in a video. And then in backward transformation, from here, I try to get back my original image. Similarly, over here, if I have a video frame, from the video frame in the back chain, I get my original image, static image. The static image, again, you forward transform, I should be able to get the video frame. So from here, you generate what is called a cycle loss. And for training purpose, this entire chain is trained to minimize this cycle loss. And once your network is trained, then using this trained network, in all those databases like COCO or Pascal VOC, I have all those annotated static images. For each of the static images, you transform it into apparent video sequence, video frame, but use the same annotation for object region. And use that frame for training your object detection and object recognition modules. So using this, you find that the kind of output that we have got is something like this. These are the outputs. So this is a video frame, which from here we try to detect the objects, and you find that this dog was missing. It could not be detected. But after this was transformed, the model was adapted or retrained using the concept that I have just said. And then you use that same model for object detection. So here you find that both of them have been properly detected. And similarly for all other different images. So I think I'll stop here stop over here. So what I did in this particular presentation is I started with the basics of machine learning and then gradually moved towards what is generative model. We talked about, we introduced what is the variational autoencoder. We introduced what is generative adversarial network. And then I presented some of our works using the generative adversarial network. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Biswas, for your
Thank you, sir.
excellent and illuminating lecture. I'm not a man from the field, so I can't really comment much, but definitely there will be some questions from the others. So may I now request that please actually raise some questions actually if you have.
Yes, please, sir.
Please raise your hand.
Yeah, can I ask now?
Yes,
Oh,
please.
sure, please. First
Yeah,
introduce
thank you so
yourself
much, sir. Yeah, thank you so much, sir. My name is Dr. Shiraz Khurana. I am from Greater Noida. Sir, your presentation was very nice. I have learned lots of things today. Sir, my question to you is, during my PhD, I have worked on computer networks. Now I would like to work on computer vision. I have
Okay.
some preliminary knowledge.
Mhm.
I need some suggestion from you that in case someone wants to start his research in computer vision, according to you, which subdomain should I target? Considering my limited mathematical knowledge in maybe the core one. Yeah.
In computer vision, so recent trend is what we have observed is whatever image processing or computer vision research we want to publish, unless there is some touch of modern techniques like machine learning, it is very difficult to satisfy the reviewers. Even if your technique is very novel, but if you are following a traditional computer vision approach or traditional image processing approach, we get reviewers' comments like, why don't you use machine learning technique? And recently, what has come up is the deep learning technique. So if your interest is in the computer vision domain, I will suggest that try to apply the machine learning algorithms or deep learning algorithms to whatever problem that you want to work on. Because for any machine vision algorithm, for any computer vision work, machine learning and deep learning is quite applicable. So I'll suggest that you try to you focus on these areas.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Any other question?
Can I ask one more question, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Sir, like lots of company, maybe if we talk about Meta and other tech giants, they are working extensively on object detections.
Yes.
So for a naive researcher like me, how it is going to be feasible to suggest something which not been done yet in object detection or maybe object classification?
Not being tried yet.
Maybe, yeah.
Uh, it is difficult to say what has not been tried. For that, you have to go for literature survey. But recent trend is even for object recognition, object detection, the approach of attention modules. So this historical artifact restoration, we have used attention models because we said that my approach is that I assume any kind of artifact is made up of parts of prior shapes. So the attention module tells you that which part can be mapped to which part of which prior shape. That is a kind of attention module. And in segmentation work, this attention module can be very, very useful. So the attention module, transformer model, there are different types of models which are just coming up. Though work has been done, but still a lot of work can be done. So you can try those approaches using attention modules or the transformer architectures.
Sir, thank you so much.
Okay. Any other question from anybody? So Professor Biswas, actually, I will just raise one particular question.
Yeah,
particularly your presentation on actually restoration of artifacts is really very, very interesting. And I do remember in 2004, when the then Chief Minister of Odisha visited our institute, he raised actually one question. And he also offered this as a sort of challenge. That is, such actually excellent monuments like, let us say, Konark is totally on ruins.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And a part is there. Some of its parts are also spread here and there in that place. Now, is there also there are some historical evidence which are available? Is there any possibility of really reconstructing, okay, through your restoration process of actually Konark first as it existed in the in its good old days. Now, once actually you can do this, then only the question of actually restoration could be done. Otherwise, it is not possible actually to do the restoration to the original shape of actually Konark.
Yes, sir.
I think there are actually many things in this country which requires this effort so that they could be really restored and brought it to the original shape. So what is actually your view on this?
Yes, sir, it is very much possible. Now, to make the restoration, because we are doing restoration in the digital domain, when it is, firstly, what we have to think of is whether restoration is authentic. So to maintain the authenticity of restoration, along with having digital scanning of, say, Konark Temple, where this digital scanning is possible using your scanners mounted on drones, so that a person need not physically climb over the temple. That might not be possible. But using drones, it can be scanned. There are other techniques like LiDAR techniques, where using the laser beams, the 3D scanning can be done. For restoration purpose, to make the restoration really authentic, if there are old photographs available, then while restoring, this restoration will be a multimodal restoration using the laser scan and also the old photographs, because if there are old photographs, then only we can, or the model can learn that in the damaged portion, what is being restored, how it is being restored, whether that matches with the old photographs that we have. So if that is possible, if that is available, then authentic restoration can be done. Otherwise, also restoration is possible, where it will be holistic, but whether it is authentic or not, that has to be certified by the architects, the archaeologists. But definitely it can be done. So this restoration, once it is done in the digital domain, then coming for physical restoration, where the material which will be used for physical restoration of the monument following
It is a
what has
different
been.
story
That's a
altogether.
different story. But firstly, whether the digital restoration is authentic. So it is possible, sir. It is quite possible.
That is, in fact, in the case of Konark, not that the original, some photographs are available, but not that, old. But some, sketches are available.
Yeah, even the sketches are also okay.
Some sketches are available. I think I do not know what type of technique actually it was used, but in Indonesia, in Borobudur temple, they have been able to actually restore it to the original shape. And this is one of the, say, UNESCO heritage site.
Yeah,
I
right.
think
There was a Japanese professor who was working on this. Even he worked on in Bali also.
Okay, Professor. It is so nice to hear you. And for as a layman like me, something actually I learned from your talk. So with this actually, I just have one more request, that these lectures are actually being recorded. So do you have any objection if it is actually shared in wider?
No, I don't have any objection. It's fine.
No objection. No?
No objections.
Okay, that is so nice. And we will be really very happy to send you a small memento by post. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So nice of you.
Thank you so much. And if I happen to come to Kharagpur, I will carry it physically.
Sure,
Okay.
sure, sir. Sure.
Okay.
You are
Thank you
always
so
welcome,
much.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall I leave, sir?